Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Guide to Color Theory. It's by Louisa Barrett. It's me! I'm Louisa. Hi. Hi. Great. So we're just going to jump right in. I'm not going to introduce myself because there's no time. So, we're just going to talk about, like, the very first thing we need to kind of dig into is just what is color theory? Because when I shared that I was doing this talk, one of my friends said, "Am I supposed to know what color theory is?" And no, you're not supposed to know. So it's fine. So at its most basic, color theory is about how to blend colors to create pleasing color combinations. But if you start to think about it from like a product design perspective, you start to think about the importance as part of like a brand identity, customer experience, and accessibility for users. And then the second thing that we need to talk about is how I, like I'm sure many of you have experienced, have suffered a devastating career blow when I realized that I would never be in the simultaneous possession of the 4 hiring qualifications to be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, which is being a teen and a ninja and a mutant and a turtle. But, as always, we must move onward from such disappointments. And so, here we have a talk in 6 parts. We will be talking about color groups, color associations, the color wheel, color combinations, color properties and terms, and accessibility because it is important. And you may be asking yourself, 6 parts is a lot of parts for a 15-minute talk, and you are correct. And you might now be asking yourself, is she going to get through that many parts in 15 minutes? And I will say, we're going to find the fuck out. So let's do this. All right. So part 1, color groups. So all colors fall into one of 3 color buckets, and it's called a color group. So first color group is warm colors. So these are generally like your yellows, your oranges, and your reds. And if you think about brands that use these types of colors, they're really trying to convey energy and just show that they're fun. So a lot of these companies are going to be like fast food restaurants and like gas stations because they're trying to get your attention and pull you in. Then, the next color group we have is cool colors. So these are going to be like your purples, your blues, and your greens. And cool colors are often thought to be like calm and soothing, and brands use these colors to convey that they're trustworthy. So if you think about the types of brands that use cool colors, you're going to see a lot of places like banks and insurance companies and Facebook. They're great. And then the last color group is neutral colors. So neutral colors can skew either cool or warm depending on the specific blend. So you see we've got some cool tones up at the top here, and these tan colors are warmer. But they're generally used as like a background of a color palette. So they're like your foundational color palette. And then the final group we're going to be talking about is not a color group, but we need to acknowledge the distinct group that the turtles fall under, which is mutants, because like colors, they skew hot and cold, and also like colors, they tend to stir up strong emotional responses in humans, which leads us to our next part, color associations. So how we relate to color and then how we feel about colors is a really big part of why we study colors and why it's important to study colors. So if we start off with red, so red is a color that has some of the strongest color associations with it. It has some very polarizing meanings. Some of them are like red can be associated with love, red can be associated with the devil and rage. So it's like a very big range of emotions that you can feel with red. And so if we think about the turtles, we have Raphael. He is a hot-headed Jersey boy. So we see that he really embodies all of these emotions that we see with red. Like he has a lot of big feelings and he doesn't know what to do with them, and so they just come out as angry all the time. So, oh no. So, okay, the next color we're going to talk about is orange. So we're still in the warm color group, so we're still thinking about energy and enthusiasm. And then, of course, for the turtles, we have Michelangelo. Michelangelo is probably the most energetic and approachable one of the turtles. He's very friendly. He just seems like a fun guy, and that's really in line with what we feel about orange. So then we're going to go back to the cool tones, and we have blue. So now we have Leonardo. He's like the responsible big brother of the group, right? So he is really reliable, he's dependable, he's a safe figure who's going to make sure that they don't make a mess of things. Then we come to purple, and the history of purple is interesting and has really strong ties to how we associate with purple. So historically, purple was really hard to make. The dye to make purple was really hard to access, which meant it was really expensive, which meant the only people that could have purple things had money. And that meant, because of the olden times, it was people that were high up in the churchy situations, and also people who were like monarchs. So, in those time periods, people that had money not only had purple stuff, but they also had access to education, which the rest of the general population did not have. So, that meant that purple has historically been associated with things like wisdom and learning. And if we think about the turtles, we have Donatello. Donatello is the engineer of the group, right? So he's the problem solver, he's the tinkerer. He's the one who's gonna like fix your truck when it breaks down. Then, final color is neutral. Again, neutrals can skew either warm or cool. They don't really have super strong associations, but they're a really solid foundation for things. And again, if we think of the turtles, we have Splinter. Splinter is the foundation of the turtles. Without him, what are they? A mess. They're just living in a sewer. He's the reason that they can get anything done. Let's be real. All right, so part 3, color wheel. So, now that we have some familiarity with color groups and the associations that can come with them, we can dive into the relationships between colors. And that means it's time for the color wheel, or the pizza of color. So, the color wheel helps us understand the purity of colors and how colors are created. So, the first type of color on the color wheel is primary colors. These are considered to be pure colors because you cannot mix any other colors to create them. So primary colors are going to be red, blue, and yellow. So all other colors come from mixing of those 3 colors together, and you cannot create those 3 colors with any other color combinations. When we come to the turtles, we see primary colors represented in Leonardo and Raphael. So they're both excuse me, I got ahead of myself here. So these two have the most intense and strong personalities of the group, but they also counter each other because they're an example of a cool tone and a warm tone. So where Raphael is going to have some fiery kind of explosive reactions to things, Leonardo is going to calm him down and keep him in line. So we get that blue is cool, red is hot dynamic. Then we have secondary colors. So secondary colors are created by combining 2 primary colors in equal amounts. So for example, red and yellow makes orange. Then when we think about the turtles again, we have Donatello and Michelangelo. So they have less assertive personalities, and that's because secondary colors are generally less strongly associated with really intense emotions. So they are coming in, you still get that hot-cool dynamic. Donatello's a little bit more studious, a little bit more serious. Michelangelo's a little bit more goofy and silly, but they don't have conflict the way that Leonardo and Raphael do. All right, part 4. All right. 4 of 6 parts, here we go. So now we're going to talk about color combinations. So now that we've got a handle on individual colors and how they relate to each other, the next step is to figure out how you can actually make effective color combinations. And this is something that seems easy, is actually a vortex of sadness. So, did you want to cry today? Let's do this. So, fortunately there are a few types of pairings that you can use, just keep them in your back pocket, to make this a little bit easier. So let's talk about it. The first and most simple type of color pairing is a complementary color pairing. So this is where you take 2 colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel, and that's your color pair. These types of pairings are really bright, really bold, but sometimes they have a little bit too much contrast and they're not really visually pleasing. And they can actually almost have like a visual vibration the way that when you butt them up next to each other. So that boundary edge between the 2 colors can actually kind of vibrate when you look at it. It's not great. So to get around that, there's a second type of pairing that's called a split complementary pairing, which is a similar concept. So you go 2 colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel, and then you take one of them and go up a tick or down a tick, And then that is your color pair. So you're still going to get that really bold, different color pairing, but it's going to be slightly softened, so you're not going to get quite so much visual vibration, and it'll just look a little bit more smooth. It's a little bit softer. The next type we have is called a triad, and so this is where you take a triangle and you drop a triangle right on the color wheel. And it gives you a really bright and vibrant sort of range of colors across the color wheel, and it gives you a lot of great options on how you want to really leverage those colors. The next kind we have is called a tetradic color combination, and it's sort of similar to a split complementary pairing where you kind of take two colors across from each other and go up a tick or down a tick, but you do that with both pairs, and it gives you a nice pair of a nice set of 4 very high contrast colors, but it's softened just a little bit so they're not very intense, and it also gives you the turtles. And this is as close as I get to conspiracy theories. So what we thought was just an arbitrary collection of colors is actually very intentional. So, my gosh. You get the hot-cool dynamic, you get aggressive and assertive, but you don't have conflict. No, you get contrast, no conflict. Oh my goodness. All right, part 5. So, now that we have talked about pairings, we've talked about individual colors, now we're going to talk about color properties so you have vocabulary so you can go to parties and be really fun. So, hooray! So, first term we're going to talk about is value. So, value describes how light or dark a color is. So, we see here, we have a very sort of like rich, deep purple. That's going to be a low value. Low value colors are going to be darker and they're going to be absorbing more light. Then, on the other side here, we have a very bright yellow, and that's a high value color. It is reflecting more light than it's absorbing, and it's also just a brighter, lighter color. So we have low value and high value colors. Then, we have tone. So a tone is made by mixing a pure color with a neutral or grayscale color. So a tone will end up being softer than an original color and allow you to get some range into a specific color within your color palette. So from a tone, we also have 2 variations. We have a tint, which is where you mix it with white to get a lighter version of that color, and then a shade, which is where you mix it with black to get a darker version of that color. Exciting. Then we have the concept of saturation. So saturation defines the range of purity of a color. And you can go from 100% pure color, which is like this very bright sort of yellow color here in this image, to 0% saturated, which becomes a gray, like that far image. So the technique to desaturate a color that's used by painters is to take 2 complementary colors, so 2 colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel, to take 2 complementary colors and then blend them together in equal amounts until you reach that gray. So by mixing these 2 complementary colors together, you desaturate both of them completely, and then the results are a tonal gray. And this gives you a neutral color that will still be visually complementary to the those two bright colors that you're using, and then you can use them as accent color and it looks really good. And it also gives you splinter. So again, we talked about how the turtles are like, they're complementary from each other, and then splinter is basically the combination of all of them, right? He is inside of them and they're inside of him, and that sounded weirder than I thought it would, but you know what I mean. So, next, It's stuck. It froze. I don't know what to do now. Do I jazz hands? Save me. Oh, hooray! Oh, good. Okay. So, thank you for the save. It got afraid of you and then it fixed it. Okay. So now, talk about accessibility strategies. So, accessibility is really all about making products as usable as possible for as many people as possible. And when we talk about color, the way that impacts users is generally through color vision deficiencies. And so if we think about just general population, about 4.5% of the population has some form of color vision deficiency, and in the US, that's about 13 million people. So it's important to keep it in mind and just keep track of it. So we're gonna go through some real exciting examples here. Oh, it hates me. Let's get into it. All right, so back to accessibility strategies. This is also the part of the talk where afterwards people come up to me and go, well, I didn't know I was colorblind, but now I do. So if that happens to you, I am very sorry. So anyway, accessibility strategies, that's about 13 million people in the US alone. If you're thinking about users of a product or something, that's a lot of people you don't want to exclude from being able to use your product. So one of the big things to keep in mind when you're dealing with color is to make sure that you're not only relying on color to communicate a message to a user. So let's take a look at some examples. A form. Who loves forms? Like 3 people. I don't know if you make forms or use forms, but good for you. So anyway, in this example, so I have full red-green color vision. So when I look at this example, I can see that I've used green and red exclusively to indicate success or failure of each individual field on this form. Now, I've put that form through a color vision deficiency simulator, and so I've basically just neutralized the red and the green, and so now, when I look at that, I can't tell why this form submission is failing. I'm getting no information. That is that's like a really frustrating thing for a user to hit, right? They're gonna leave your service, they don't wanna do this. This is a bummer. So, again, if we're thinking about just don't rely solely on color to communicate a message, this is the same form, but I've just made a couple additions to it. So I've added icons. So I've added a check mark for success, words are hard, and then a cross, like an X, to indicate failure. And I've also added some language just under the failed field to communicate to a user what happened, what went wrong, how can they fix it. So now, just like these small, simple solutions, if I switch back over to that same form that's been run through the color vision deficiency simulator, we can see that this still holds up. So now, regardless of whether or not you have full color vision, this is a better experience for you. This is more effective for you. This is easier to use. So, excellent. We can use color and images together for greater success. And again, if we think about the turtles sort of look the same. I'm sorry if you are a turtle fan, but I look at a turtle and I'm like, I don't know. And so far, all that we've talked about is relying on color to differentiate between these 4. So now I've put the turtles through a color vision deficiency simulator. What? But if you notice, we can still tell exactly who is who because of their weapons. So each turtle has a completely distinctive and unique weapon set that they use. So that means that regardless of whether or not we have full color vision, we're able to tell who is who all the time. And so basically, the turtles meet the web accessibility standards, which is great. And also, the turtles themselves are accessible, which is exciting. We did it. Hooray for accessibility. All right. And so now to wrap up. We had 6 parts coloring colors and conspiracy theories, and my research and references were exclusively from being a kid in the 90s. Oops, I went too fast. And that's the end. Is questions a thing that happens now? Oh, yes.
Where does April and Neil fall into conspiracy theory?
I only had 15 minutes. There's a lot that I couldn't cover. I just didn't want to get into the April and her and the Raphael dynamic is weird, and it was too big for this talk. Yes, we got a question back here.
I just want to say thank you for these being the turtles that we're looking at, because those are the turtles that I grew up and loved. So.
Yeah, from the documentary movie. Yeah.
When I go to New York, look at that.
You have to, yeah.
30 minutes. Pizza Dude's got 30 minutes.
Exactly, yeah. Domino's always do that. Yes, over here.
How would you make the turtles more accessible?
More accessible. Ooh. More accessible turtles. I think you could do things like have alt tags attached to the turtles. Just sort of hovering around, I don't know. Yeah, right here.
Are there other examples of the tetrad color scheme, like in prominent, like...
Tetradic ones?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. Probably. I mean, there probably are. I would have to kind of do some thinking.
Yeah, Powerpuff Girls.
Oh. Powerpuff Girls. Yes. Thank you for saving me from myself. Yes. Yes.
How did you get a job as a professional colorer?
Well, that's not my job, but so I didn't. No, this talk came out of I was teaching software engineering, and I had built out a curriculum track to teach front-end engineers a little bit of context about like what designers do, so they could work better across teams. And it kind of came up as a joke, and then I just kind of ran with it. Yeah.
How much of this is like pan-cultural, like the associations?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a great question. So just like how much of this sort of spans different cultures?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a great point. So color associations are really strongly bound to the culture that you grew up with. So colors like red can have really positive connotations or really specific connotations in some cultures and really negative connotations in other cultures. Or colors like white in a lot of Western cultures can be like associated with like brightness and purity. And then in other cultures, it's a color of mourning. So there's these very different color associations that are based just on the communities and cultures you grew up in. And for the turtles themselves, I think it probably varies a little bit. I mean, like I have my very specific culture that I grew up as a part of, and my those cultural influences. So I'm not totally. I can't really speak for other people, but I would imagine that there is probably some nuance there across different cultures. Yeah. Yes.
Just recently brought this up. My work colors are like teal and like yellow, right, and green. And this particular person that I work with is colorblind in a way that makes yellow and blue and green look all the same. So none of our colors like work for them, and they can't see any of like the internal analytics graphs that we make for them. And they had to like submit a product request to be like, this graph is nonsense. I can't see it at all.
Yep.
So it's just really interesting seeing like this come up in my real life and then hearing you talk about it. So like, what would you recommend to companies that are like brand centric, that are trying to create content that is like in their brand colors to like make that accessible to people who might not be able to see it?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. It's also like a very thoughtful accessibility question. So basically, like when you're dealing with colors and you have a huge number of users or just like internal team members, how do you make sure that regardless of their color vision ability, they're still going to be able to like utilize and read your products? I think a big one is just the idea of not relying solely on color to communicate a message, and then also being really conscious and thoughtful about contrast ratios. So the Worldwide Web Consortium accessibility standards, they have a couple of really useful like contrast ratio checkers. So you can actually put in like hex values and it'll spit out like the accessibility standards and whether or not these color combinations meet those standards. So that has to do with like whether or not you can read a certain color of text when it's overlaying another color of text. And so that's super valuable. I think that's a really great place to start. And then with like things like graphs, I think that's a space where one, like yes, the contrast between the colors is really important.